So you want a bike that does it all. It's comfortable all day on the highway for hundreds of miles. It destroys BDRs like they're nothing, and it can leave a two-stroke in the dust on single track. So you do your research and find out that nobody actually makes that bike. Wait, it's not even possible to make that bike? You dig a bit deeper. What compromises are you going to make? You need to be able to do highway, and you want to ride with your buddies who have dirt bikes on the weekends on single track. What options do you have? First, you consider a Tenere 700. After all, Poltara's made it look easy to do hard enduro on one. And then you remember, oh yeah, I'm not a pro rider, and a 470-pound bike is going to be a lot more difficult for me to do all of that on. Maybe a CRF 300 Rally, or a KLX 300, you think. And then remember that they can barely hit 65 miles an hour. Maybe that's good enough? But this is America. Sorry to the rest of the world, where highways go up to 75 or 85 miles an hour. How are you supposed to go on adventures if you're going to need to haul your bike to the trails with a truck? I know. I'll spend $18,000 making a KTM 500 the perfect bike. Oh wait, I don't have $18,000, and I don't want to measure my service intervals in hours. You go to the forums, digging deeper, and then you find it. The final conclusion. The forum guru says, just go with the DR650. It can do everything. And guess what? They're right. It's the perfect bike for doing a bit of everything and doing nothing super well. Oh, I mean, that sounds kind of disappointing, but that is the compromise of all dual sports. They're the jacks of all trades and the masters of none. But maybe that's not true anymore. Maybe there is a bike out there that can actually do it all. During your extensive research, you heard rumblings about a Dakar rally bike that was coming to everyday riders, the Kove 450 Rally. Well, gentlemen and lady, for the one of you watching this, after all, I know my audience statistics, I don't own a DR650, so I can't use it in this comparison. But what I do own is its brother from another mother, the XR650L, leaning slightly more to the dirt side of things. It's the big red pig. The lame version because of the L, not the R. I also own the new kid on the block. It was touted as being the unicorn at last. How do they stack up against each other? Is the Kove really the unicorn we've been waiting for? Or have we had a unicorn right under our noses this whole time? This video is a long time in the making and took a lot of hours and effort, so like and subscribe if you feel so inclined. I've wanted to make this since I bought my Kove brand new, but I wanted to get some miles on it first. Up front, I wanted to say I paid for both of these bikes with my own money. I don't have any sponsors, and I'll try to be as objective as possible through this video. But at the end of the day, motorcycles speak to the heart, no matter how much we analyze their spec sheets with our brains. First up, let's talk about why I'm bothering to compare these two. After all, how could an old school carb thumper even be close to the same thing as a Dakar rally bike? First, obviously, I own both, but the main reason is that they're both dual sports, or light adventure bikes depending on how you set them up, and they fill a similar niche, not on paper, but in practice. They are the two bikes plus the DR650 that can give you the most range of capability both on and off-road. They can do 75 miles an hour on the highway and then hop off onto a dirt road and rip down some single track, all without complaining. But I don't want to sit here and talk about spec sheets, so let's just cover the important bits first before we get into it. Both weigh about 320 pounds dry and 350 pounds wet with equal amounts of fuel, although the Kove does hold more gas in the end. The XR puts out a respectable 34 to 40 wheel horsepower depending on how you set it up, and 31 to 38 foot-pounds of torque. Its motor likes it when you keep the revs low and use all that torque. The Kove, on the other hand, puts out 42 horsepower stock for the street legal version, with 50 wheel horsepower achievable with some mods and an ECU. Kove claims 28 foot-pounds of torque stock, and it's unknown how much you gain with tuning, but estimates say somewhere around 30 to 33 foot-pounds is the final figure, and this engine likes to be revved out and kept near the red line, pushing it hard. Both of them have towering seat heights of 37 and 38 inches for the XR and Kove respectively, with each sporting about a foot of ground clearance, although the XR does have an extra inch over the Kove here. They both have adjustable suspension, although the Kove's is much more tunable, which makes sense seeing as it was designed this century. Enough numbers. Let's get down to it. The test I have planned today allows us to see how these dual sports perform in nearly all the conditions they'll commonly be ridden in, and I'll assign ratings to each bike after each section is complete. We'll start on pavement, doing some surface streets, and then highway. From there we'll move on to fast dirt roads, two-track, and then single track. For the sake of this video, I only recorded small test segments on each of these different terrains. However, I've put approximately 3,000 miles over the course of months on a mix of all the above on each bike, which makes me feel qualified enough to speak to both of them. So first up, how do they handle pavement? The XR does well for a bike of its age. The torquey motor makes it easy to ride around town, and while it's not going to win any drag races, it's still a fun bike to ride around on surface streets. The two issues I have with it here are the rider triangle. It feels like my hands are in my lap, even with the tall bars pushed all the way forward and using the longest aftermarket cables I could find. And the seat is forcing me forwards into the gas tank, making it not very pleasant on the family jewels. The second issue I have with it is the gearbox. It takes a little while for it to actually shift from first to second gear, and accidental neutrals are common. The last point here is that if you're going to be using it for short stints around town, it takes a while for it to fully warm up, and requires you to play with the choke and idle screw until it's fully warm. Now for the Kove. Kove might not have the same grunt down low, but the Revy engine makes it feel like the car equivalent of a Miata or a hot hatch. It's just fun to push it no matter where you're riding, although this can get you into trouble. It's perfectly comfortable in the rider's triangle, but in the low revs it has a weird jerkiness to the throttle. For a bike with a cush hub, sometimes it doesn't feel like it. Both of these bikes do just fine as around town rides. So for city riding, I give the XR 7.5 out of 10, and the Kove an 8.5 out of 10. Surface streets are nothing a 300 couldn't handle. The whole point of these bikes is that they're more capable on the highway, so let's see how they do there. First up is going to be the XR, and here's where the bike suffers, or more aptly, you do. That big, unbalanced 650 single makes sure you feel every revolution. And the windshield is not just for show, it's a necessity. Otherwise the headlight fairing would cause extreme buffeting on my helmet. You can really feel the lack of a fairing and how tall this bike is. It feels like a sail in the wind, just wanting to get pushed around. The lack of a sixth gear definitely hurts it too, but it can go 75 miles an hour according to the GPS, and hold it as long as you can tolerate it, which is enough for most highways in the US. Moving on to the Kove on the highway, this is a much more relaxed experience. I wouldn't want to do long tours on this bike, but it just feels so much better at speed. The windshield doesn't look too tall, but it definitely keeps me from getting buffeted, and the sixth gear really helps it here. The revs are still a little bit high for my liking, but part of that is due to me gearing it down with a bit larger of a rear sprocket. I'll take that as a trade-off for the better performance off-road. It's still a tall bike and definitely gets pushed around by the wind, but not nearly as badly as the XR. It can hold 75 to 80 miles an hour all day, and the only limitation is your poor sore meat cheeks and iron will, but it definitely won't tax either of those as much as the XR. For highway riding, I give the XR a rating of better than a DRZ 400, I guess, 5.5 out of 10. And for highway riding, I give the Kove a rating of not great, but not terrible, 7 out of 10. Neither is amazing for the highway, but the Kove is the clear winner here, due to the significantly lower vibrations. The sixth gear and fairing also help. Now for the bits you've all been waiting for. Let's hit the dirt. We'll start off on a nice easy dirt road, going kinda fast, and work our way up to talking single track, with some rankings along the way. Just to be transparent, these bikes don't have the same tires. The XR is sporting Kenda Trackmaster 2s that have probably half their life left, while the Kove is rocking brand new Tusk D Sports. There should be a slight off-road tire advantage to the XR with its 90-10 setup, but let's see for ourselves how they stack up. On fast dirt, the XR likes to push a bit in corners. It seems like it doesn't want to hold a line very well, and it's always understeering, but otherwise I don't really have too many complaints. It just doesn't really like to go as fast as the Kove here. Revving it out makes the bike feel like it hates you, and you start getting more vibration the faster you push it, as the motor begins to protest. But it will do what you ask of it, as long as it's not too quick. If you're the type to go slow anyway and enjoy the views, this might not even be a downside for you. Moving on to the Kove. Kove lives for this faster off-road riding. It was built for it, and you can tell. It doesn't push as much through the corners, and the better suspension really makes light work of this kind of stuff. This bike is asking me to challenge it and push it harder and faster. It can go slower and cruise along easily just like the XR, but it's always asking you to let it off the chain and push harder. Not much to complain about on either of these here. They both eat this kind of road up like nothing. Although the Kove is going to squeak out a win due to its versatility with the various speeds. For fast dirt, Forest Service roads, and graded dirt roads, I rate the XR, man, I wish it wasn't so slow, 8.75 out of 10. And for Forest Service roads, fast dirt, and graded dirt roads, I rate the Kove, this feels like a race bike in its element, 10 out of 10. Alright, time for some real dirt. Let's talk about two-track. The XR has no real trouble with this kind of trail. What it does have trouble with is the fact that when riding in the mountains, I gain about 3,700 feet of elevation, and the car just can't keep up with the huge swings in air density that riding in Colorado puts it through. Although it rolls over most things without a problem, the suspension really does start to show its age. It only really complains if I start to push it faster though. This bike also reminds me that I have 4 gallons of gas balanced on top of the engine just sloshing around. It makes it feel like I can't lean it over too far without hitting a point of no return rather quickly, and sometimes it reacts a bit unpredictably when the fuel moves from one side of the tank to the other. But on the plus side for it, that ungodly amount of torque makes hill climbs and slower terrain feel easier than the Kove. Only just slightly though. The Kove is still in its element on faster two-track kind of trails. I'm definitely what's holding the bike back. The suspension is glorious while standing and going fast, and it's only when I sit down and go a bit slower that I start to notice how stiff it is. The low-slung fuel tanks make it feel nimble and flickable in the corners, and racing it over whoops isn't going to buck me off like the XR does. When things slow down and get a bit more technical, especially climbing hills, it needs you to get a bit more momentum than the XR due to the power band of the engine, but it still makes most of it easy unless you absolutely need a punch in the face of torque right off of idle. The lighter feeling bike makes up for almost all of that immediately, overall helping the Kove squeak out another win here. For two-track, I rate the XR, and it's a big dirt bike, isn't it? 8.75 out of 10. And for two-track, I rate the Kove way too much fun to be legal. 9.75 out of 10. Let's move on to talking about single track. First up again, age before beauty, it's the XR. Even though these bikes are nearly the same weight on paper, the XR definitely feels more top heavy when the going gets slow. It is a bit more tractable than the Kove, needing less clutch work, which winds up being a good thing seeing as its clutch pull is way too heavy and the friction zone far too small. Although the suspension has plenty of travel, it isn't the best, and it makes me feel a lot of the time like the bike is going to do what it wants to, and I just have to hang on for dear life, trying not to let it buck me off. I'll be honest here and say that I never did as much single track on the XR as I did on the Kove. But coming back to it after only taking the Kove on my rides for a few months now reminds me why I was looking so hard for a replacement for it. The level of rider skill required to ride this bike through anything harder than an easy ATV trail is much higher than on the Kove. An open desert race bike on tight trails? Preposterous. Really though, the Kove still handles itself well on single track. It might not be built for it, but it hangs just fine. That on-off low rev throttle hurts a bit, but with some clutch work it doesn't affect us too much. The real star of the show here is still the suspension. While it is a bit stiff even after adjustment, it really makes me feel confident in this bike. The low-slung fuel tanks also help keep the center of gravity nice and low. You really don't feel the weight of this bike unless you're moving at a crawl. Sure, I need to carry a bit more momentum to conquer obstacles than I do on the XR, but everything else about this bike inspires confidence. It feels like it can do anything, and it's up to you to just pick the right line and get close enough to the right technique. For the sake of comparison, I've edited these three sequences back to back, with the Kove on the left and the XR on the right, performing the exact same terrain. As you can see in every sequence, the Kove not only finishes first and goes faster throughout, but makes it look much easier. For single track, I rate the XR I didn't hear no bell, 6 out of 10. And for single track, I rate the Kove it ain't no two-stroke, but it'll get the job done, 7.75 out of 10. Now we've seen what these bikes can do out on the trails, but what's it like to live with them when you're not riding? First up is going to be maintenance. The XR is easier and cheaper to work on due to the simpler design and the exposed engine, but it's harder to get it dialed in and tuned just right due to the carburetor. I found that a lot of the threads on this bike like to be pulled out if they're over torqued at all, so either have a well-calibrated wrist or keep a good supply of helicoils nearby. Or if you're smart, just use a torque wrench for everything. If there's ever something wrong with this bike, somebody else has already had that issue and posted about it on the forums, or made a video explaining exactly how to do it step by step, which is a definite plus. The big identified issues with this bike are first, the CDI, which is likely to go out and leave you stranded on a trail. So definitely bring a spare, or pony up and buy the Ignitec one. Second is going to be the countershaft, which due to how thin the front sprocket is can wear out the splines and require a complete engine teardown and lots of money to replace. And third, this bike is very likely to burn oil. Due to the lack of an oil cooler, the oil temps in this bike can get quite high, really diminishing the oil lifespan greatly if you're riding it in hot and slow conditions. The Kove is still a relatively easy bike to work on, but there are some quirks. Obviously, to get to the engine, you have to take off the skid plate and front gas tanks, which make it a bit more of a pain. But the biggest issue is the oil. Checking the level requires you to use a zip tie cut to the proper length, unless you want to buy an aftermarket clutch cover with a sight glass or a check bolt. Also, the exhaust needs to be removed from the mid-pipe back for every oil change, and there's a graphite exhaust gasket that wears out due to the constant on and off of the exhaust, which can be difficult to source. Early adopters also reported issues with the starter clutch, but those have been fixed by Kove for the 2024 model year and on. Another common problem encountered is the gas boiling in the gas tanks due to the proximity to the exhaust header. All of these problems are noted and have either been addressed by Kove directly or by the community with fixes. Maintenance intervals are similar for both of these bikes, with oil changes recommended at 2,000 miles and other items varying. For ease of maintenance, I rate the XR and, I never want to clean a carb again, 8.75 out of 10. And for ease of maintenance, I rate the Kove, what do you mean I have to read the service manual? 7 out of 10. How could you own a bike without fitting it with all the latest and greatest farkles? Let's talk aftermarket support. The XR hasn't changed much since it was first released, leading to a flourishing aftermarket. It's not as extensive as some other bikes, such as the DR650, but you can find pretty much anything you need for this bike. Obviously, the Kove not being out for as long is going to make the aftermarket weaker. It also runs into the issue a lot of the aftermarket parts come from overseas and are subject to the current tariffs. It still isn't too bad though, and it's consistently growing larger. It's just not going to have as many options for you currently. For aftermarket, I rate the XR, no matter how much you upgrade this bike, it's still old, 8.5 out of 10. And for aftermarket, I rate the Kove, when I search for parts on Amazon, all that comes up is Bluetooth speakers, 6.5 out of 10. Now for the last category, followed by the final ratings. It's time for, how does it ADV? As we saw for the XR, the large elevation swings hurt its performance due to the carburetor, and it ain't no gold wing on the highway, but the large aftermarket lets you configure it how you like, and it's got that Honda reliability. It's easy to fix on the side of a trail, and you can probably find parts for it almost anywhere. It still loses out a bit to the DR650 here, but the difference is negligible, and both can be completely adventurized and slay BDRs. Let's just hope you can find ethanol-free gas to keep the carburetor happy. The Kove makes light work of the typical riding you do on an adventure ride. Sure, it's not the best on the highway, but for the trade-off of making the off-road way easier and still being able to hang relatively well with regular adventure bikes, it's a great all-around bike. Parts availability does hurt a bit, as you would have to order parts to get shipped to you if you had an issue somewhere, but the entire OEM parts catalog is still available online. The fuel range definitely buys it some points here too, as with all 8 gallons topped off, you don't have to worry about running out, and you can even act as an impromptu rotopax for your buddies. For use as a light adventure bike, I give the XR your grandpappy's Tenere, 7 out of 10. And for use as a light adventure bike, I give the Kove the Unicorn, maybe, 9 out of 10. At last, it's time for the final ratings. Here's the scores in each category. For the XR, it ranked a 7.5 on city streets, a 5.5 on highway, an 8.75 on dirt roads and 2-track, a 6 on single track, an 8.75 on maintenance, an 8.5 on aftermarket, and a 7 on adventure. For the Kove, it ranked an 8.5 on city streets, a 7 on highway, a 10 on dirt roads, a 9.75 on 2-track, a 7.75 on single track, a 7 on maintenance, a 6.5 on aftermarket, and a 9 on adventure. The XR receives a final score of 7.6, proving it still holds its own, even with how far bikes have come in 30 years since it was first released. The XR or the DR are the dual sport or light adventure rider's budget option of choice. The XR is a bike that was made from a parts bin of 80s bikes and hasn't changed since it was released in 1993, and the fact that it came so close to the Kove is a testament to what a legendary bike it still is. And with a final score of 8.2, the victor, to nobody's surprise, is the Kove. If I had been so inclined to include a technology category, I think it would have pulled even further ahead, but that's kind of obvious, and I wanted to make this a more fair comparison. Kove was designed in the 2020s to race Dakar. It's arguably the best modern option for a do-it-all bike, with few competing options on the market. Going into this video, I was expecting the Kove to absolutely blow the XR out of the water, but I don't think the choice between them is so clear-cut anymore. The Kove feels a lot better for every situation, and for me I can justify the extra cost associated with that. But maybe you can't. If so, I hope this video showed you can still get out and do all the same things on a less expensive bike. You don't need all the modern things and all the farkles. You just might have a bit more difficult of a time, or not get where you're going quite as fast. But after all, what's an adventure without a bit of a challenge? Thanks for watching until the end. Now get out there and ride.
But we're not comparing the D Sports and the Trackmasters here. We're comparing the bikes. A lot less dramatic in the turnaround there. Do this jump again.